Chapter 12, Gray Market Rush. They didn't stop moving for about 3 or 4 hours. Through the heavily wooded area, they kept moving forward with limited conversation and sound. It was nearly completely dark by the time they came to a point they felt they were far away enough to stop at. "All right, man, if anyone's coming, we would have heard or seen something by now," Trace declared, as they all stood in the dark. "Are we supposed to make a fire or something?" asked Ashley. She had taken the hoodie off and tied it around her waist. While it wasn't hot out, in fact, it was getting colder as the night came on around them. But the constant movement through the woods and the adrenaline had caused them to begin sweating and to stink. "Nah, man, bad move. If someone was coming out this way looking for us, they would see the light and smoke. No fires tonight," Trace replied. He sat down on the ground and pulled his laptop out of his bag. "We got a problem," he said, as David and Ashley sat down to catch a break as well. "What's that?" David asked, hoping it would be something mundane like, "Hey, no one can't eat tonight, gosh darn it," or "I'm scared of the dark." But David had a premonition that it was going to be much worse than that. "Back on the Flash, when those guards came out blasting, one of the shots hit my screen. It straight up busted. I can't use it like this," Trey said limply, like a kid who was looking at his favorite action figure whose leg fell off. David looked over at the laptop as Trey sat it on the ground and saw the screen. It was in fact busted up bad. A bullet had hit the upper left side of the screen and it was cracked all the way down. No lights or anything showed on the screen. "Can it be replaced easily?" he asked, hoping for an easy answer. "The entire laptop? No, all my shit is on here. It's also not something easily traced when you go into networks, past firewalls, and general porn sites. The hardware I had on this was something I spent a great deal of time putting together," Trace said. David couldn't see his face, but by the tone which he was talking, he imagined Trace with a quivering lower lip and tears building up in his eyes. With a smile on his face from the image hidden in the dark, he asked, "Is it just the screen, or is the whole thing wrecked?" Trace pressed the power button on the laptop. A second later, the light on the power button lit up, but the screen remained dark. "The hardware and software I got in here is still there, but I need a new screen. Otherwise, there is no job." David considered this and leaned back some to look up at the stars. There were so many of them. Why hadn't he looked up at them like this before? Ashley spoke up while David pondered the sky. "Well, once we find some civilization, we can root out a gray market and try to get a new screen if they have them," she said, pulling David back from the sky and into the conversation. "Well, Trace, is that the answer? I never have been around the gray market, so only you two know really if there is any truth to what Ashley is saying," he said, as Trace stared quietly at the black screen. Finally, his head moved, and David realized that he was nodding to a thought he was having. "Yeah, she's right. We find a gray market, we have a good chance of running into a tech mark who can get me what I need." "Cool," said David. "But how far are we away from one of those? Do we have any clue where we are and how far we got until we get to a place where this can go down?" Ashley, who was sitting next to David, replied, "We were on the Flash for about 30 or so minutes. We may be fairly close to the Central East and head of state Commonwealth borders. But I'm not sure really. There's a lot more nature around here than I would expect for us to be that close to the border. We may be further inland of the Central Eastern Commonwealth than all that." David mulled this over for a moment. "Maybe we are lucky, and we are close enough to a place like Pittsburgh or something." Trace looked up at him. "Pittsburgh is a dump, but it would be big enough for a gray market. We won't know for sure until we pick back up and start moving again." He lay down on the ground of the forest area they had been sitting down in. "We should take shifts in case anyone or anything tries to sneak up on us. One of you two take first watch, I don't care which." With that, Trace stopped talking and laid still as he tried to pass out in the forest they found themselves in. David looked over at the darkened face of Ashley. "I can take the first one. Isn't like I'm going to pass out right now anyways," he said as he leaned in and gave her a modest little peck on the cheek, then moved towards an outer section of the spot they were in so he could keep his eye posted on all the things that went bump in the night. Ashley followed him over to his little watch-out spot and sat down again next to him. "Back on the Flash, with the guard," she started. It was clear she wanted to make him talk about it. In truth, from the moment David pulled the trigger and the events that followed, he hadn't really had too much time to consider the ordeal. He remembered staring dumbly down at the man after he fell. A momentary blankness swallowed David up during the incident. During his time in mandatory military service, the UCA had been in no wars or conflicts. So, he had been trained how to use a gun. He had been trained how to fight with his hands, but up until these last few days, he never actually had to do any of it. Yeah, I haven't really let it creep into my thoughts all that much. I've shot a gun before, in the time I had to serve, but I never shot a human. But he was pulling out a gun too. He looked like a guy who waits day in and day out for a reason to pull the trigger. It felt like in that moment, someone was going to die. I don't know, it just seemed like impossible. David realized his feelings about it were mixed. He remembered how in his readings of his father's notebook, there were references to the first time he killed someone. Of course, it was much different than his own experience, and his father was much younger. If anybody is taking the time to read this thing, and if that person is you, David, I kind of feel like I should tell you what it was like to kill another human. Could be the fact that I watched Vance zero a guy on a gig that just passed. It could be because I wonder what you will do when it's you. But I feel like if you find yourself either being shipped off to fight for the UCA in some foreign country, or if you are working with the group I am with these days, then you should know what comes with those type of things. The truth is, I don't actually know about the first person I ever killed. My first time ever in a combat situation, I was fresh-faced 18, and we had bullets raining down on us. I pulled a grenade off my combat belt and chucked it out towards where the bullets were coming from. It went off. Some of the firing stopped, some didn't. I don't know if it really killed anyone, but I remember the first face-to-face death I saw. It was a few weeks after that little skirmish with the grenade. We had moved on a factory somewhere down in South America. We made it deep in when something blew up causing mass confusion, and we ended up dispersed around the place. The radio goes off and says that the people we were there fighting decided they rather blow up the joint with us inside it than to let us take it by force. We had a projected 5 minutes to get out and regroup at the rally point with what remained of our platoon. I made a break for the back offices in the area I was in, hoping for a quick way out. Funny, when you're young and facing certain death, you move pretty damn quick. But as I made my way through the second set of office rooms, a young kid stood up. He had been hiding in there, hoping none of us would find him. Honestly, I couldn't have cared less about the shithead. I just wanted to keep moving to avoid the incoming strike. But as I moved forward to find the nearest exit, he moved towards me, and fast. He was on me before I could pull up the rifle, and he slipped a blade right into my left shoulder. You feel it when it makes its way through the unbroken parts of your body. But after that, steel makes its way through the skin and tissue, adrenaline kicks in for a time, and you forget. I took my right hand off the rifle to reach for my own combat blade. He was trying to pull his knife out of my shoulder to take another stab at me, this time aiming for a fatal target. But I moved quicker, pulled my blade out, and stuck it firmly in the left side of his chest, falling forward on top of him, stopping him from getting away. I watched as the life left his eyes. He was maybe 2 years younger than me. I tell you this because this world and the people that run it have a funny way of preaching love, peace, and happiness. All the while, they put a blade in your hand and tell you it's a jungle out there. At the end of the day, I didn't know who the hell that kid was. I don't know if he was a rebel, a villain, or just some kid working in the back when we got sent in to clean out the place. But what I know is he pulled a knife on me. He was ready to kill me and bear the results of it in his life going forward, and in that moment, I made the same decision. Sometimes a situation comes up where no matter what, someone is going to die. All I want to warn you of is make sure it isn't you. The words his father wrote stuck out to him as he thought of his own experience. The man pulled his gun. David didn't want the guy to be there, didn't want him to think of himself as a modern-day John Wayne. He just needed the guy to get on the ground. Instead, the guard pulled the gun. He aimed it at David. Someone was going to die today. David had to make sure it wasn't him. David, Ashley interjected herself into his thoughts. I know we said we would be ready for whatever came at us when we ran and kept running. But that was a lot. I don't blame you. I don't think you are some heartless killer. I just want you to know that. David shook his head slowly as he listened to her. He didn't think he was a heartless killer either. Was he a killer? By definition, he would have to say, I guess so, but he didn't seek it out. In some way, he knew the guard would follow him, but it wouldn't end him. They were fighting on opposite sides of a war that needed to be fought. At least on David's side, it needed to be. Don't worry about me. Really, it was shit-fucking luck, but hopefully we can manage the rest of this without any more death. He told her, wrapping an arm around her as the night air chilled around them. But he knew that the guard was a sort of beginning. Those SDT agents would still be coming. They were hitting the DOE. This wasn't over just yet. After a couple of hours of staring at nothing, Trace came to switch out with David. Ashley had fallen asleep using David as a pillow, but David welcomed the warmth of having her close. "Funny thing they do, huh?" Trace said as he came walking beside them. David looked up at him, his eyelids feeling like weights, slowly dragging him down into the sweet escape of sleep. Until that moment, he had not realized just how tired he was from the day's events. "What's that?" David asked, finding it strange to hear voices after so many hours of nothing but the sounds of nature. Women. They play this whole game of being as big and bad as a dude, but get put into positions of discomfort or take them out of their cozy little elements, and they are using a guy as a pillow. David couldn't see Trace's face, but he knew he would have one of those I-know-all looks on his face. David put his face in Ashley's hair. It had a hint of outside and sweat in the smell, but he could still smell her under it all. "I assume that's part of the game, man. We all play to what strengths and weaknesses we got. If you could convince me to let you use me like a pillow, you'd come shake your ginger ass over here too." Trace laughed. "Yeah, I guess." This was odd. Trace agreeing with him, and now this awkwardly sitting down next to David. This was not in the nature of their relationship. "Look, man, was that your first?" Trace finally asked. He seemed to be trying to dance around the question, as though David might break down and sob over being asked if he was a first-time killer, or if this was a typically weekday for him. David looked up but kept his eyes shut. The truth was, it sucked he had to kill the guy, but everyone asking him how he felt made him feel uneasy. Like he was supposed to feel a guilt he didn't feel. It sucked the man was dead. He wasn't exactly the problem, but he was willing to defend the problem. David had to make a choice, and he did, without regrets. "That would have been the first one, Trace," David said with little to no tone in his voice. Trace said nothing for a second. "I take it you are handling it well then. Some people turn into slobbering messes after something like that. But even back there, once you snapped from the initial moment, you bounced back quick." "We didn't have a choice, did we? Sink or swim. Them or us. We don't make the rules, we just shuffle along like everyone else does. I didn't want the guy to pull his gun, but he did. If I have to choose between us or him, I choose him each time," David replied. It was the best way he could convey how he felt. He wasn't mad, hurt, or sad, but he wasn't happy, elated, and thrilled about it either. The world was fucked, the game is rigged, and if you want to yell foul, well, good luck with that. Someone was more than likely to have to eat it along the way. Trace was silent again for a moment. "Good man, real good. I was worried how you two would handle this type of shit, being office lackeys and whatnot. But the girl hauling off and knocking the dweeby kid on his ass, and you doing what you had to with the guard. We might be all right as long as no one loses their heads." David snorted. "We lose our heads on this gig. It might be more literal than figurative." Trace made a whistling sound, that if his nose had not been in such poor condition, would have probably been a snort, and David laid back. He was careful to bring Ashley down with him. As he did so, he was tired and knew that tomorrow had all the promise of being just as taxing. The next morning came and the three of them started to make their way in the general direction the Flash had been going, or they hoped so anyways. They needed to find signs of civilization if they wanted to get back on track with the task at hand. They needed to find a way to get the message out. They would be late also. There were people counting on them to be in certain places at certain times. Although by now, news would have been out that a terrorist shooting and takeover of the flashing line leaving the STL station to DC and how a guard was killed. Their faces most likely would be smeared over TV as well. Several more hours passed as the three trekked through the woods before they started to notice trash. Then a guard rail from a highway. They hopped over the railing and began walking along the side of the road until they could find a sign telling them where they were and the direction they were heading. They got it when an exit sign came up that read, "Pittsburgh exit here," Good shit, sighed an exhausted Trace. Although he was in better shape than Trace, David also said a silent thank you to whoever was watching over them. They walked another 2 hours after maneuvering their way up the exit ramp towards Pittsburgh. When they got to the giant city's outer limits, the smell hit them in a wave. David had never been to any other place than the city he grew up in. So, although the smell wasn't pleasant, he was interested to see what the city was like. As they entered the city and went further in, David noted that the place seemed to have an element of permeant dirtiness to it. It clearly had undergone the same renovation his own city had some years back when the new wave of technological innovation hit. But somehow, this place seemed to wear it all down quicker, and the people themselves seemed dirty too. They still had that odd, vacant look of Chembal on their faces. But the burden of past generations living here still showed somewhat on the people's faces. They came up to a woman on a street corner typing away on her phone. "Hey," Trace said. The girl looked up. She was wearing all black, too much black really. It was distracting, though David thought that was clearly what she was going for. "Whoa man, what's up?" she asked in a dragged-out tone, the type of tone that someone spoke in when they woke up from a bender. "You are Chemdog Sugar? Or just a raider?" asked Trace. The girl's hazy eyes showed a spark of anger. "Fuck y'all, man. You don't know me. Look at yourself, dude. You looking like a raider that got his ass beat for missing payment, but was too proud to pull a trick." Well, David thought, if she was on brain raid, she had a tasteful personality to go with it. Trace's eye twitched, showing his annoyance at her comment. "Well, Heaney, you are on the side of the street wearing some stupidly tight black clothes awfully early in the morning in a clearly bad side of town. The hell I'm supposed to think," Trace said, trying to take command of the conversation again. "I ain't no mark, and I ain't touched brain raid in weeks, asshole. What you want anyways?" she asked. David was impressed. She said it herself. She wasn't no mark. And to top it off, she hadn't even put brain-damaging chemicals into her body in weeks. His first interaction with Pittsburgh was a memorable one for sure. He leaned over to Ashley. "Once this is done, we should take a vacation here and really soak in the atmosphere and take in all this no-mark culture they have here." Ashley had to pretend like she was looking at something in the worn-down building next to them to hide her smile. "Looking for the gray market in this place? Where is it?" asked Trace. David felt like advertising they weren't from around here, and that they may or may not have cash was not the wisest move, but in front of the Queen of the Black Tights, he didn't want to show his disagreement. She looked at them up and down, then looked around the generally busy street. "It ain't illegal for me to know anything about that, so me saying I know where to look ain't a crime. So if this is some bullshit move to try and sting my ass, the gray market ain't the way to do it." Trace rolled his eyes, but before he could speak, David cut in. "You said it yourself, the gray market isn't illegal, so if we were undercover or whatever telling us where it is won't matter. Now if you lie to us, or send us off to meet some friends of yours who think we are marks, and we are undercover, then damn baby that shit's gonna suck for you after we get done with whoever you sent us off to." The woman considered this. David was hoping for the flimsy front of them being possibly a real legal problem for her would be just the right ticket they needed to avoid a possible ass-kicking in some back alley. Finally, the woman sighed and looked at Trace. "Go down about 2 street intersections from here, then take the left. You're going to take that road for half a block. Once you get down half a block, there's an old warehouse on the right side of the street. It's abandoned. Only it's not, you understand?" Trace nodded and said, "Thanks," as the three of them kept moving in the direction she had given them. "This normal?" asked David, once they got out of earshot of the woman. The one in STL was an entire street block in a rundown part of town. Most people think it's just a small ghost town, but a decent amount of people live there, selling legal, borderline legal, and straight-out illegal things, Ashley said. David considered this for a moment. "Gray markets are different in all cities, man. Typically, most of what's there ain't illegal. It's just not commonplace anymore since they push all that other shit on people these days. So the people that sell the good shit have to go out of sight and out of mind. They go too hard to see places. They don't get hit with fines for petty shit. The people that know of them get to have the luxury of what they sell." Trace explained to David why it had to be so far removed from a place out in the open. Then something hit David like running into a brick wall and he blurted out like a child. How is all this stuff around us? But they claim only like 2% of the UCA population is unmedicated? Trace lifted his head up to the sky and began laughing out loudly, for a decent amount of time. Dude, how dense are you? Those numbers are fake, man. Nobody knows the real numbers because they just lie about it. But look at our lovely little friend back there. You think she's medicated on the proper Chembal prescription? Think hard about everything we have seen just on our way here. The elites don't medicate, the politicians, the Hollywood actors, unless they choose to. The real numbers are not so black and white. They lie to make more morons take their little pills is all. For some reason, David had not put that together until Trace said it just then. But it made sense. 15 minutes later, they were outside the old shoddy-looking warehouse. A few cars had been parked in front. Well, it definitely looks like the type of place, Trace said, and began walking towards the ruined building. Once they reached the door of the front entrance, they stepped in. A multitude of smells hit David, the most prominent being that of the old dusty scent of a dead building. A woman behind what used to be a security guard post looked up from a TV showing an old cartoon. $5 entrance fee, she said in a voice greatly damaged from excessive menthol cigarette abuse. Ashley stepped forward and paid the woman $15. She counted the money quickly, then put it in a drawer. Enjoy the market, she said dryly, as she hit a buzzer button that unlatched the security rings to the rest of the building. The first section was comprised of various food items, signs that read, "Homegrown fruits and vegetables," or "natural non-synth meat," littered the area. There were more people inside the warehouse than there seemed cars out front. A large collection of different-looking people, some wearing nice outfits or suits even, and those who wore something closely resembling the woman on the corner and everything in between. Music of some kind was being played, and it took David a long time to realize that this type of music was referred to by the hip as club music. They made their way through the food section and then into the body mod area. Simple older things like tattoos, piercings, were for purchase here. David found that strange since neither thing was considered taboo. It was common for teens in today's world to get a tat or piercing, even when under the influence of Chembal. There were more advanced body mod options too. Neural links and face reworks were also slated as being for sale here. Those things were not cheap though, and you had to be a certain type of person to want to have your entire face reworked. Then they made it into the tech section, and Trace sighed in bliss as he saw the world of barely legal technology opened up around them. They found a woman whose arms were covered in colorful tattoos, half blonde, half red hair, and eyes with pupils that had been altered to cover the entirety of her eyes' irises. She spoke in a high-toned nasal voice. "What you need, babe?" she asked as Trace rolled up to her booth. He was staring up at the prices and without looking back at her said, "Need a laptop screen. Not a new deck, just the screen. How much?" She rolled around in her chair as she pondered his question. Cost you $150 since I don't know your face. Leave the deck here. I'll get to it when I can." Trace looked back at her. "Not an option. Needs to happen now, and I ain't leaving my deck here with you unsupervised." Her all-black eyes widened at his reaction. "Oh, someone's a bad boy, huh? You got dirty secrets on that deck you don't want the world to know about?" she asked in a mocking way. "If you three are some of those nasty old terrorists they go on and on about on the networks, I don't know if I can offer my services so freely." David could see where this was heading. So could Trace. 300? I want it done now, and I want it done in front of me. No scans, just the screen fixed. Understand? She nodded with a wry smile on her face. "Show me the cash, sugar, and we can get started." Ashley pulled out the money and passed it over to the long-fingered woman. She put the cash in a spot behind the booth. "Come on back with your deck, hun. Let's give her a facelift." Trace turned around to David and Ashley. "We need some wheels too, and gas if they sell that type of stuff here. Try to avoid the nuclear-powered stuff if we can. I'll stay here with Black Iris over there while she works on my deck." David nodded and looked over Trace's shoulder at the booth. "Just don't get on talking techie with her and falling in love, huh? We can't stay put in Pittsburgh long." Trace snorted and turned back around and followed the woman to the part of her section where she worked. David and Ashley took off looking for cars. David figured that if there were cars to be sold here, they would most likely be towards the back where the dock doors would be located. They passed through a coitus district, where men and women sold themselves, footage of themselves, or holodecks of themselves. No surprise, where there's a seedy element, there's always got to be sex, David muttered. Honestly, though, that always seemed to be the prevailing image in places like this, which David found odd because when he slept with Ashley, the last thing he would want is to have club music playing overhead and body mods or natural foods could be found just a hop, skip, and jump away. They finally made it to the dock doors where, you guessed it, a small auto shop was located. They had several cars parked in the dock area and a ramp on a couple of the doors to roll them out into the parking lot when sold. David and Ashley found an exceptionally greasy-looking car's salesman and asked if he had any gas burners in this lot. Their new greasy friend smiled a toothy smile that showed some of his teeth had been replaced with several different colored metals. Well, it just so happens I got 3 of them. Why you wanting one of those dynos if you don't mind me asking? Can't find gas to easy out there since it got outlawed to sell, the man said with a snake-like voice that let David know the man had a decent idea of why. But he played along anyways. Fans of the classics, man? What's the cheapest one you got? The man smiled just as big as before. Fans of the classic but want the worst on lot, huh? Interesting fans if I ever heard otherwise. But the cheapest one is that gray sedan from the early 1990s. She's mint condish, run you a cool $5,000, not including gas. That price wasn't going to work at all. They only had a little over $5,000 left as it was. All right, man, $5,000 for a car that's almost 70 years old? Maybe show us this thing before you go throwing out prices like that, David said. He knew he was showing his anger, but he didn't have time to play ring around the rosy with a snake like this guy. The man coolly walked them over to the end of the dock and pointed out the car. It was an early 1990s-something sedan. Maybe at one point white, but now it was a hazy, yellowish white. 3 of the tires were missing hubcaps, the gas tank cap was missing, windows in the back were covered with see-through bags, and oh yeah, the AC and heat didn't work. You want 5 Gs for this? David asked after all was seen, following up with, does it even start? Oh baby, come on now. Don't be like that. She may look ruggish, but something tells me she's exactly what you need. You see? At this point, the man was clearly toying with David. Ashley chimed in now. Tell me something if we didn't look like we needed this car. What's it really worth to you? The man just smiled back at her. Yeah, but that ain't the name of the game, girlie. You do in fact need this car. I see it right on your face. This car is your salvation. I won't pry too deep in what you all need it for. But it is a need, so I need $5,000 to give it away. This was pointless. $5,000, but you throw in 2 tanks of gas. I'd rather walk than spend any more than that. David told him, and he meant it too. That would knock their money pool down to a simple $400 remaining. Just enough to feed them on the way to DC. The slick snake rolled his head around some as he considered it. Then he smiled and stuck out his hand. You drive a hard bargain, my good sir and lady, but I will comply with the arrangement if you do. They all shook hands on it. They paid him the cash, he handed over the old key, and his guys set to work filling up the car, and 2 extra tanks in the trunk as well. Once it was ready to go, the men set to moving it down off the loading dock. David and Ashley went off to find Trace. He was still at the booth with the black-eyed woman. She was sitting down with her elbows on the counter looking up at him, while he stood there leaning to talk to her. Trace, Ashley beckoned to him. He turned his head and saw them and waved. You get the car? He asked simply. Yeah, David said. Wasn't cheap, though. It'll be a tight ride to where we need to get to from here. Trace considered that, nodded. Duh fuck can you do about it sometimes, am I right? Then he looked back over to the woman. Take care, thanks for the fix. She smiled at him. Take care yourself, wild boy. Can't wait to hear about it all in the news. They headed down towards the sedan. David and Trace played rock, paper, scissors to see who would drive. David lost. The car took a little bit of effort to start up, and then, with David sitting in the back on the ripped seats, Ashley and passenger giving directions, and Trace in the driver's seat throwing a fit about the heat not working, they set off towards DC,